Okay, I am pleased to introduce our next panel moderator, who is Maggie Cawley, and she will be leading a panel discussion titled Open Data Actions and Aspirations. So if you give a round of applause for Maggie and our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. We're just going to take our seats, as will you. Thank you.
All righty. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you met someone new or saw an old friend on the break. Very much looking forward to this conversation after our wonderful keynote. There are a lot of things that we're going to discuss that were touched upon. My name is Maggie Cawley. For those of you who have not yet met, I serve as the Executive Director of OpenStreetMap US. We are the nonprofit in the nation that supports the OpenStreetMap project and advocates for open data. I also serve as the chair of the National Spatial the NGAC. And now I will invite my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with Daryl Dudley.
Thank you, Maggie. Daryl Dudley. I lead the transportation theme of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, and I work for the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. BTS is the federal agency for transportation statistics, and we provide authoritative information about the transportation system and how it affects society. As theme lead, I'm also work in a couple spaces for the FGDC. I chair a couple committees there about just sharing information among covered agencies and data standardization. And I'm also on the UN GDIM's policy and legal frameworks working group.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks. I'm Joel Schlegel with Army Corps of Engineers. My day job's at the Army Cold Regions Research Lab. I support GIS across the Corps of Engineers. I've done enterprise GIS for the Corps, installation mapping, supported defense installation, spatial data infrastructure. And a big project for me for the past few years has been supporting GeoPlatform and Department of Interior and FGDC on that work. So a lot of different hats, but neither FEMA nor DOI, as it says on the slide.
Carrie.
So good morning, almost afternoon. I'm Carrie Stokes, and I am the Chief Geographer and the Director of the Geocenter at the U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID. And I get to lead a team of geographers and data analysts with remote sensing and mapping expertise who work in the Geocenter within USAID. And our role is a bit unique because we're not a mapping agency. We apply our skills to generate insights using geospatial information to advise and guide our colleagues both in Washington and in our overseas missions around the world. So I'm happy to be here today.
Great. Happy to have you all here. So, I mean, the title of our panel is kind of a bit misleading on the path that I actually want to go down. So we're here to talk about ways that the federal agencies are harnessing open data in their workflows, but we'll touch on that. But what I'd really like to spend a lot more time on is barriers to broader adoption and use. What systems are we perpetuating that are broken that we might need to break even further to rebuild? How can we evolve these systems? And, what do we have to do within our community to leverage this going into the future? And speaking to Budu's talk, reduce that linear workflow and start thinking about it more as this broader ecosystem. So I'll start with the first part, so it's not a completely theme switch for all of you, but we'll start, I think, with Daryl and, which ways are perspective on the data, acquisition, use, where is DOT currently with data?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I've been thinking a lot lately about robotic navigation, digital mapping, HD maps, electronic navigation charts, and digital twins. The talk before this was amazing. I feel much more informed now than I've ever been. So transportation will increasingly rely on an integrated system, and those subsystems need to aggregate data from multiple sources. So the challenge becomes, how do we ensure the data we consume is safe to use? So a couple things have been shaping my thoughts around this lately. Report out of the UN GGIM about authoritative data and in an evolving landscape. So it's a nice thing about authoritative data. And then the European Commission study on the integrity and reliability of high definition maps. And unfortunately, it gives me more questions than answers for everybody. So, how do we collaborate with the digital map, HD map, and electronic navigation industry to improve the national spatial data infrastructure and the transportation network? How do we facilitate the creation and consumption of local infrastructure data? How do we facilitate its aggregation? And then how do we ensure that that data is safe to consume?
Great. Joel, where are you on this? How's the Army Corps and the FEMA, and how many did he list, all the acronyms?
Well, it's a mess. The data is everywhere, and it's getting worse, right? The more we do, the more data we produce, the less expensive it becomes less expensive it is to produce data, the less expensive it is to share data, the more we find our data everywhere, and the more systems that are aggregating data, the more difficult it seems to be to work with them. And so from the work we've done with you, Maggie, seeing the work OpenStreetMap is doing and kind of hinted at by Buddha's talk earlier, the idea that instead of data all being everywhere, there can be a data commons, a common set of data that where your data is somewhere and can be found and referenced easily is a really interesting new direction, I think, in mapping for federal government. Rather than the linear creation process we saw earlier, I have requirements, I build my data set, I publish my data set, I make a web service, maybe make some metadata if I have a little bit of time left, and then I put it on a server someplace and hope somebody finds it and reuses it, versus maybe just putting that data right out there where it can be found and used immediately is what I'm super interested in right now.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, how many people in this room have relate to that slide that Buddha showed, that linear system? Raise your hands. Okay, great. I mean, how many building footprints do we need? We've got Microsoft buildings, we've got Google Open buildings, we've got OpenStreetMap buildings now, we have Oak Ridge buildings. So thinking about the systems and the duplication of efforts, I mean, how many building footprints are there of just this auditorium? I wonder. So Carrie, you bring a different perspective to the stage, and I'd like to share from the more international data perspective.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, so USAID is in the name, international development. All of our work is focused internationally, not so much here in this country. And the challenge that we have is a lack of data in the many countries where we work. It's not consistent. We have a physical presence in about 85 countries across 5 regions: Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. And in our response to disasters, if they happen outside of those countries, then we will also have a temporary presence. So at least 100 countries at any one time, it feels like we're working to deal with humanitarian response or the longer-term development needs that involve sectors like democracy and governance, economic growth, health, education, conflict prevention and stabilization. The list really goes on, but imagine all the things that a country needs to lift itself out of poverty. That's what USAID is involved with. So that means the kinds of data sets that we need to make the most informed decisions are myriad and varied. And with my role, I'm focused on the geographic data sets. So we are very heavily invested in OpenStreetMap. So I'm going to do what Buddha did earlier. Raise your hand if you've never heard of OSM. Ooh, the pressure's on, peer pressure. Okay, not a single hand. And nobody wants to admit it if they haven't heard of it at this point. But as an agency, we see OpenStreetMap as a real opportunity to give voice to local people. And we have invested in a program with university students called Youth Mappers to provide digital mapping skills so they can get used to mapping their world with OpenStreetMap and can collect the kind of data that's absolutely important to their communities to make them more resilient, whether that's to climate change impacts, food security, health issues. So we very much realize that for the analyses that my team does and those within the geospatial community of USAID, we need to use open data. We need to contribute to the ecosystem of open data. And as an agency, we do invest in something called the Demographic and Health Survey, the DHS, which is similar. It's a household survey. It's similar to what the census would do in this country, but it's active in many of the countries where USAID works. And that detailed data set is published. It's been going on for at least 30 plus years. And every few years, it's updated in the countries. And so my team really does use that form of open data as well, because it gives us information about human geography at a very geographically granular level for the kinds of decisions that we need to make in USAID.
Fantastic. And I hope you're all thinking of your questions too, because we are going to allow ample time for discussion with all of you, because I think that's one of the best parts about FedGeoDay. So, diving into the really fun part, I love talking about the challenges because that's the only way that we can get them out of the way. So, thinking about that, again, going back to that slide of that linear process, one of the barriers that I see to some of these words that we're throwing out, like collaboration and, moving from the map to the decision. A lot of times I think we focus on the end product of the map, but really you don't need a map in every case. You just need to enable informed decision-making. And from where I sit, it seems like a lot of us are still stuck on the left side of that processes. We're all curating and collecting. And, like Joel said, we don't have time to get to the decision and the documentation and all those really important things that end up, empowering the citizens and our communities to make the decisions that they need. Within your agencies, in order for us to move from, from linear to system, what do you see as the major things that need to change? Is it technology? Is it culture? Is it something else? Carrie, maybe we start with you on this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say for USAID, it's definitely culture. Also, our IT systems, we're trying to get them into the 21st century, but we do have some real constraints internally to ensure that they're safe and secure. Somebody mentioned earlier today about every system is being hacked all of the time or trying to be hacked, and we know that. So balancing the security of a system and also ensuring that we can make the kinds of decisions that we need and have the agility, the flexibility to be able to use it effectively. But I think within USAID, we have so many smart people in all those sectors that I mentioned, plus more, who have worked internationally in an environment that didn't always have the same assets and resources that we're used to in this country. And so what has happened many times is people in the Foreign Service who spend their careers abroad may not have known that we could even ask more detailed and complex questions because in the past the data didn't exist for that. And now in today's world, it's almost like a fire hose of data coming at us, and we have to sift through it to make sense of what actually matters for the kinds of decisions we're making in international development. So I would say for us to continue on our path forward, which we are doing, we're trying to shift our culture to understand that everything by default is digital. We're doing development in a digital world now. That's very different than when USAID got its start in the early 1960s. And how do we consider data as a true asset to manage through its life cycle and ensure that it's accessible to the very agency that is funding the creation of the data itself. And I think we can speak about this, but to actually have the full systems in place, we're still working on that. But we are actually working toward it. But it's a process, and it does take time to do it. And in this process that I've been working on now for a number of years, I'm also seeing a new generation of people coming into the agency, and they're already on board with this concept of, the world has digital data and we can use it to make decisions on a daily basis. So that's also helpful. I'm not blaming our sluggishness on those who have had more years in the Foreign Service at all. Don't get me wrong. It's just the push, the pressure to continue to evolve and adapt to a world to ensure we're still relevant to the digital world does require very creative thinking and ensuring that we're not going to be compromising the security of our systems along the way.
Thanks. Joel, your thoughts?
So for FedGeoDay, we said we're open source and open standards and open data, but there wasn't even really much discussion about open source. A few years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, the idea that we were using open source software in geospatial would have been something to talk about. We would have been talking about, the Java tribe or the C tribe or who's doing what. We would have been talking about geospatial data abstraction library. That's all just baked in now. There was one slide mentioning it, but it wasn't really part of the discussion. We all know that those tools are industrial strength. They're the best tools out there. Similarly with open standards, not much talk about the open standards. We just acknowledged them. Web map services, web feature services, stack, all just part of our business as professionals. And also open data, really not a question, right? As federal employees, federal responsibility, we know our data is open. But somehow when we put all three of those things together, we still don't really wind up with an open data ecosystem that we really want, because our data is still coming out as individual products, right? It's still not, it's not semantically interoperable. We have different attributes, we have different categorizations, we have different ways of describing things. And we ask, why does Microsoft have a building footprint and FEMA have a building footprint? Because it's almost easier to just build it yourself. We said the computing power is so great, the software is so great, that the cost of interoperability seems to be high. It's just easier to I'll crunch all history of all data together myself and get the map I need. And then not, as opposed to maybe a thought where we contribute to a commons, a data commons, a common map layers, common standards. So I can't remember if the question was problem or solution.
We're in problems now. We're talking.
Problems?
This is the time to whine.
Okay. That's that. Okay, so there I am. That's the problem.
Jerry, what are your problems, Daryl?
That's not a problem, but nothing I want to share here with you guys. No, I'm going to mention the A word, authoritative data.
We've said none of that on this panel, did we?
Well, I think that's the biggest challenge we're facing, that authoritative data is a social construct, and it's changing because society's changing and mapping's changing. And the UN GGIM talks about authoritative data being any data that meets its intended purpose. So if that holds true, first we have to define a data set's purpose before it can be authoritative. And my question then becomes, what is the process that translates source data into authoritative data? And then how do you automate that process so that we can easily share data among communities? And I think that question is largely informed by risk. If you think of risk on a scale, on one extreme or the far right, the most high-risk scale would be like nautical charts that could kill or injure somebody. And maybe on the less risky scale would be geographic names that could be insensitive and might offend somebody. Do those two data sets require the same rigor as far as data management processes go? So I think we need to answer those questions before we can trust the data we share among each other. So that's kind of where my head's been.
All right. Well, we've got a lot of problems on the table. We need things to be easy, interoperable, authoritative, secure, shareable, but also encourage collaboration. So, a lot of actually, I'm not going to go there this time. But so how do we, better collaborate, create secure systems, and, even start with foundational data sets that we can all leverage to solve the problems that we're all trying to solve in the world. So my last question that I told the panel I was going to ask them was, let's go to the last word of our title. And what are their aspirations? If you have the magic wand question, like what's the one thing you would change within the system in which you work? Is it a culture change? Is it a systems change? Can you enable cloud for the entire world? What would be your one thing that you would wave that magic wand and automatically change within where you are?
You look at me.
Yep, I'll go start with you on this one.
On the transportation side of things, like I said, things were increasingly complex and integrated, and that really kind of compels collaboration. And the good thing about collaboration is that it brings all the relevant knowledge and experiences to one place, and we can then apply that knowledge to those problems. And that way we avoid kind of in a policy gaps or not answering the question fully. And because we have that knowledge and experience in one place, we can better answer these questions and find better solutions. Which ultimately, as a federal employee, we're here to create public value, and that's I think the model is changing. That collaboration is considered one of the better ways to do that.
I thought of this answer on the metro here before I knew the question, but it's pins on maps is the problem. It's creating more layers and more data sets with more pins, identifying individual spots rather than contributing to or referencing a data set that already exists, I think is a change we can make in our thinking about GIS data or spatial data. Rather than saying I have a new project, I need to put a pin on a map, look for the pin, look for a way to reference something that exists, whether it's in OpenStreetMap or National Inventory of Dams or National Transportation Atlas database, somewhere the thing that you're trying to map has probably been mapped before, and by referencing that thing, you're able to contribute to a larger audience, larger data ecosystem, rather than just adding more pins and more noise to the world. That's my answer.
All right, that was the magic wand for everybody. So, Carrie?
Sure. So I've been thinking about this magic wand for quite a while, and we're on our way. It hasn't fully materialized, but we're making progress. So at USAID, we have a phrase that we have been, not just a phrase, a philosophy, I would say, especially in the GeoCenter, about applying a geographic approach to development. And what that really means is a systems way of thinking about a particular place, whatever the scale of that place may be. And it involves bringing together data and people with expertise to understand where the problems are on the ground and at what scale in the countries where we work, and compare that to where we may already be working. And then to also evaluate how our programs are performing on the ground by geographic location. So it's a process. It's not just as, pins on a map. And the process is part of what we're trying to promote in the GeoCenter and with our whole geospatial community that are part of USAID around the world. Just last November, we launched our very first geospatial strategy. That's exciting because, as I said earlier, we're not a mapping agency, but we have a presence all over the world, and everything we do happens somewhere. So being able to improve our internal systems so that our own workforce has access to geospatial data and tools that's open, ensuring that our own workforce has the capacity to use the data and the tools. Having access is one thing, but can they use it? And integrating this approach into all of our existing policies and priorities that we've already committed to as an agency is critical. But I would say with the magic wand, it would be allowing us as an agency to really be a global leader in the application of geospatial solutions for international development and humanitarian assistance. And to do that fourth objective does require the financial resources to make the strategy truly something to implement and be transformative. And part of that leadership role, if I could, wave right now, would be ensuring that I have the long-term resources to continue to invest in this Youth Mappers program, which is truly empowering the next generation to be leaders in their own countries, in their own communities, and to learn to map not just where they live, but also other parts of the world, connect with their peers in other universities. We have 400 universities participating in nearly 80 countries, and we've never advertised. So the young people is really kind of where I see this revolution occurring, and I want to continue to be able to invest in them as long as possible, because when they get involved, amazing things happen and change the world for better.
Thanks. You know, we all know the resources are out there. I think Voodoo also said $300 million went into this one effort. And I mean, OpenStreetMap runs on less than $1 million a year. So I mean, how many it's 300 OSMs. But any responses to what Carrie said before we go to audience questions? Anybody have any other thoughts? Daryl, did you have something?
I don't want to touch resources, no. I'll leave that one alone.
Okay. Great. We have about 10 minutes before we all have to break for lunch. We'd love to take some questions from all of you.
We mentioned Overture really briefly, but Overture is actually working on a global system of IDs for everything, like less pins on the map, more authoritative pins on the map. Are there intellectual property reasons why the US government can't be involved with Overture? Because I'm doing some work for them, and it's all companies right now. And I would love to see more of this kind of data being part of the process. Is there so the question is there some reason why you guys aren't working with Overture currently?
I'm gonna have to pass, but because I can't answer for I can't answer for the federal government as a whole. But I'm certainly aware of Overture maps and the good work they're doing, trying to solve exactly the problem we're talking about, right? Taking these diverse set of data and putting them into one consistent data set. And I think we're starting to see uses for Overture maps in the federal government. But as far as active participation, maybe that's one for later in the day.
Yeah, thanks. Anyone else want to touch that? We can.
I mean, we're certainly open for collaborations, but it would have to be set up in a structured way. We have to make sure that everybody has fair competition to what we're doing. So.
And since no one's going to fire me, so I can answer this question. Maybe. Sorry, my board's out there somewhere. I would say this is also going back to some of those issues that we touched upon. I mean, Overture relies greatly on existing data sets. You know, they're using AI-generated data. They're using OpenStreetMap, crowd-generated data, and this goes back to one of the problems that was brought up is the culture. I think for a long time there's not been trust in the crowd and volunteer-generated information like VGI data. That's part of the issue there, but also, I mean, AI is kind of a black box, so it's one of those things where how do you trust that over a human as well? So I think before we can even start thinking about the Overture participation, some of these underlying issues within the way that we all think about authoritative may have to be solved. Does anybody want to agree or disagree? All right, other questions? Thanks.
Between this talk and the previous one, it's really kind of setting off a lot of lights in my head, just connecting a lot of dots. I'm thinking back personally to years back working in humanitarian work. The Haiti earthquake response. I did work with Engineers Without Borders, things like that. It's like, this geo community has been great at creating frameworks for bringing info together. It's like every project, it was always, there was 6 other NGOs that were here before, this one even showed up. But there is kind of a missing piece. I mean, we touched on a number of things, metadata, stack spec. There's a lot of really cool things that the geo community has built. I think Joel touched on one that is really ringing loudly for me right now, and I think it also applies to Gen AI and everything else, is the semantic layer. Building the ontologies, things like authoritative, it's like, for what purpose? I think back to, Jay Johnson, when he ran DHS, he said, yeah, there's authoritative data, but in an emergency response, sometimes it's out of date, it's incomplete, and you need more, you need other stuff. Also, the authoritative data we might have, it's got typos, it's got, it needs to be geocoded. You can't really work with it for analysis, so other things have to happen. It's not the be-all and end-all, and, trying to get people to understand that. But then also, what does it mean? What is the specific context? It's like, I work in a regulatory agency, EPA, it's like facility. What does that mean? well, it's subpart J of 40 CFR, whatever. That's like a very narrow definition. One program may have, another program may have a totally different definition. Is there an ontology model? Is there something that can map those? This is a broader concept that encompasses this other one, or does it not? Are they totally unrelated? But those are the things that I think we need to think about building, because then, how does a Gen AI deal with that? How do you train a Gen AI model with the nuance? And I think that's where semantic models are going to be absolutely critical. So just kind of want to get thoughts on that.
I'll just drop the mic.
Any responses? I'm sorry, what was your name? Dave Smith. So Dave.
No, that's all. That was I agree 100%. There's nothing to add. I think you're exactly right.
I think the shifting understanding of authoritative data also shifts more of the responsibility to the user. An example I think of is Google addresses or Google routing, and people use it for emergency response, and that's not its declared purpose. So if you're a user and you're consuming that information for emergency response and something goes wrong, then you're responsible for that as a user. So, educating people about geospatial information and how to consume it responsibly, I think, is important.
The blue dot problem. Carrie?
Yeah, I want to add on to that. Just educating people on how to really use the data responsibly. And that sounds like it's a big classroom with millions of people in it, but I think every single day we're getting opportunities to learn how to do that. And so one of the roles that we have with my team and in our geospatial community within USAID, which is small, is trying to make our own colleagues and our partners in the countries where we work much more aware about the power of geospatial information and how it drives so much when you put location associated with any kind of data set. And now it's even more valuable than it was before. But how to actually use that in a responsible way for making the kinds of decisions that we're making around the world. And that's, I think, an ongoing effort, and it's never gonna end. I think it's just part of the industry that we're in.
Yeah. And a lot of times, we're building the data sets, and we don't know who's disseminating them to the public, right? So, how do we follow that thread of responsibility? Do we follow that thread? If, there's a trail on OpenStreetMap that finds its way into all trails and it doesn't exist on the ground, who do we point to along the way? And I think that consumer education is also going to be really, really important going forward. So I agree with you. We have a few more, 3 minutes, according to Doug. So one more question back here.
Thank you for your time. And sorry, this is louder than I thought. My question is about licensing. One of the issues that my agency always has with keeping data public and making sure it's usable and getting all of that cleared up and making sure it's compatible, that's one of the problems that we kind of have at my agency. And I was wondering if you guys had a similar struggle or have insight when it comes to licensing your data and releasing it for consumption. Thank you.
Is this directed at the agencies or me? Anybody?
Either.
Okay. I was going to say, for OpenStreetMap, the ODBL license can be great, and it can also create a lot of perceived barriers to adoption, and some of them are real, obviously, because attribution is a thing, but I think the licensing discussion maybe is something that we do for an entire panel next FedGeoDay, because it is important. I'm really glad you asked that question. Go ahead.
Data collection is really expensive, and the data producers that are collecting that data and want to publish it spend a lot of time and effort on that, and they need a mechanism to protect that investment. So as consumers, we need to respect that as best we can, and understand that duplication is really easy, and just to work with our partners on using their terms of use.
My experience is that there's generally a culture of sharing the data and publishing data and making it open, and license-wise, there's little restriction. What we do see is the tension between cybersecurity and the IT world wanting to protect data versus other policies saying that the data should be open. So data characterization, data standardization sort of go hand in hand with making the data allowing the data to be open, in my experience.
Similar for us as well. It's really important that we protect people's privacy, especially in places that are underserved communities in parts of the world who have not historically been recognized by their governments. And so the last thing we're trying to do in any kind of geographic analysis is make their lives worse versus improving their lives. So that's not so much about the licensing, it's just more a matter of ensuring that we are not actually making data public that could be harmful inadvertently to the communities that we're working with. But the only licensing I would say we really get involved with, and it's just respecting the licensing of NGA, because they do allow us, other civilian agencies, to get access to high-resolution satellite imagery if it's for a specific purpose with regard to the U.S. government interest. So our partners who are implementing programs in the field, if they need a high-resolution image, they can actually come through us to get access to that. But they are not allowed to sell it or reuse it other than for that particular purpose. So that's really the extent to that we get involved with licensing.
Thank you very much for being a great audience and engaging questions. And thanks to my fellow panelists. We are now going to break for lunch and hope these conversations keep going, and have a great day. Thank you very much.